So, okay, so this week, last week, in fact, you guys raised talking about empath kind of aspects of ourselves, and how that can get really confusing and really overwhelming. And I think it was really poignant note actually that Raj just was explaining to us all that this week has been huge emotionally, I would say, and impacted a lot of people around the world in terms of how we all perceive ourselves, and where we position ourselves in relation to one another, as to that relationship of how we identify physically with race, but also how we perceive we all react in different ways, or we think that we're not. So for me personally, I've been doing this book, which actually Raj saw that I put up on Instagram, called My Grandmother's Hands, that I'd come across, which is about healing the trauma of race, but also the responsibility that no matter what race you are, you have a responsibility to heal your trauma, because we all have our own triggers that we've inherited in our bodies through epigenetics, that impact our just gut reaction, like literally from that vagus nerve. And I've talked about the vagus nerve before, and I don't know, Sandy, if you know about the vagus nerve, but it's basically the only nerve that goes between the brain and the rest of the body. And it kind of, it sits quite low down towards the gut, and so it's often part of that gut reaction, and it has nerves across into all of your abdomen, and into kind of like that visceral sense of your body felt sense. And so sometimes that nerve is storing a lot of our trauma, and in our genes, through the impact of like what stress or what food you eat or what physical environment your ancestors are in impacts the kind of genetics and what DNA is triggered in your cells. And your behavior and your situations in life can trigger the DNA to do something different in your genes, which can then trigger or not trigger things like cancer and stuff. And part of that is also triggering trauma from, if we've inherited from ancestors, either inferiority because we've been a minority and we've been horrendously abused, or those of us who've been in a superior race and have our other issues. And some of the interesting things that come up in like that book are that what we inherit can still be trauma from hundreds and hundreds of years ago through our ancestors, that we don't even know, that we are carrying kind of medieval tortures and hanging kind of, a destruction of the body that used to happen. And that's how we all used to relate to one another. And so these kind of things can really trigger us. And we don't even necessarily know that our nervous system is going to react to those things. We don't necessarily even know what our nervous system is sensitive to. And part of being an empath, and I genuinely think, we're all empaths. If you're not an empath, that's when you're probably a psychopath and have to genuinely be sectioned and not part of society, because we all feel we're social beings. We're created to be social, to support each other. We have more nerves across our shoulders because we want to touch each other, we want to hug each other. Like, that's a huge part of how we interact, and what creates us and helps us bond and helps us survive and grow as human beings. And that empath is also what we're all feeling right now, right? Because we're all really feeling a lot of different collective empathy for all of the different pain that's been going on. But some of us are more sensitive than others. And you might not even know that you're that sensitive, because we live a very rational lifestyle. And we're driven in a very yang, like masculine energy way of that logic approach. So, it's problem solving, there's steps to a solution, and we don't necessarily always stop and engage with that emotional side. And therefore you might be really sensitive but not know it for a really long time, and just think that, like, you're overwhelmed, or you're super stressed, or you're really anxious, because you're just getting all these feelings, but you don't know why you're getting them. And it's a good way to see if you're probably quite an empath will be if you tend to mirror people quite a lot. So you might find that you naturally kind of sink into a similar posture of another person, or you find yourself kind of, you get those people who slightly lip copy you when you're talking, right? And it's their way of trying to really empathically connect with you. And it's how we do that with one another can sometimes be a way in which you can start to become aware that you're quite sensitive. And I would say most of the people I feel who have signed up to the online retreat are all quite sensitive people from the conversations that we've had. So I think it's great that we're all aware that we are. I've had quite a few teachers who I've worked with on this kind of stuff over the years, and I've had a mixture of really gentle teachers who've been very kind of compassionate and soft with it. And then I've also had some teachers who've been quite strict. And I think there's something in the balance of the two. And so I wanted to put forward kind of the 4 things that I feel from my teachers have been really clear about our responsibility. So even though we're an empath and we feel a lot of everything else, our responsibility in our life is that we are here to process our own experience. And we have to take the time to process what it is that's happening to us that is ours to process, which Raj beautifully identified in terms of your own emotional stuff, right, that you're having to go through. And as part of that, we have to recognize that we can't process other people's stuff. So even though we might really want to sometimes, and we can kind of really see that answer, you have to not do that and let them be. So trying not to take that on. And I definitely think we've probably all been guilty at some point in our lives of trying to take on other people's problems and trying to solve them. And as a part of that, the best way to be an empath is to lead by example. And leading by example is about being authentic with yourself, so that you don't lose your identity in other people. And this comes up especially in close relationships and family and things that really have something very close to your values and your sense of self. And really knowing who you are is a lot of the work, I think, of an empath, so that you don't keep on letting yourself getting kind of strayed down the path of other people's lives to live. So, you can kind of get to the point where you're living other people's lives and you're not really living your own. And that way then you can't lead by example, because you're not actually being authentic about who you are. You're kind of trying to be a load of other people. And often the way that we can lead by example is actually probably the easiest thing to do, which is to stand in what makes us feel happiest. But quite often we forget that, and we seem to become passive a little bit when we're empathic. We can become a little bit too passive, and that sometimes leads to feelings like people pleasing, or we can feel a bit resentful about other people taking advantage of us, feel like people kind of take the mickey a bit too much when we start doing stuff. And that also can be that we become quite big at conflict avoidance and not wanting to kind of step up and hold space for what we want. And we think that by being passive, it's the path of least resistance, but actually it's often not. It often has consequences much further down the line that are a lot more complicated for us to get out of. So really trying to stay in your own alignment and being authentic with yourself about whether or not what you're choosing to do gives you joy. So another one of my teachers likes to say, most of what goes on around us, right, 90% is nonverbal communication. And even more so is energy that we feel and we sense into. So it's not just emotional, it's the energy that you're sensing. And that comes into it being a physical sense often in our bodies. I don't know if you guys feel like you get it elsewhere, but most of the time I find it feels like holding stuff, and you feel heavy, or you feel kind of like ugh and stuck when it's other people's, when you start carrying other people's whatever you're deciding to take on. And I get told off for calling it stuff because it doesn't sound very nice, but I'm always like, when it's not mine, it's stuff, right? Even my own is stuff, but it's just, it's got to flow. And when we are communicating with people, and I don't know if you find, but like sometimes you go into a situation and you think you're in a certain mood, and then suddenly you've swapped, like something switched in your energy levels, and you're like, what happened just then? Right? And it might be that you barely even had that interaction, but just in the way that person held space. You know, they may not have said anything. There's the way that they were physically in a space that you saw could just completely and utterly switch your energy. And that is an empath having, you know, a reaction to a situation. And if you don't process that, that's when you become unwell, whether that's emotionally unwell or physically unwell, is because you're not processing it. So one of the first things is just to really take the time to become aware of what are the situations that may be triggering certain reactions from you. So a good exercise to do is to think of certain people and certain scenarios that you tend to find you notice that you have quite an obvious shift in your behavior or your feelings or your energy. Maybe you feel drained physically, maybe you feel sad or you get agitated. And how is it that that shift happens when you go into that? Or does it even start to happen before you even get to seeing someone that you know kind of winds you up in some way? So taking your time to think about what those situations are and being really clear about the fact that that is a situation that creates an energetic reaction. And thinking about how often does that happen to you? So is it happening a lot that you're suddenly feeling really drained when you're going into other situations? Or, you know, I don't know, like, you know, when you have a really, really bad partner in your life and like you can't even wake up with kind of like feeling like you have the energy. And then when you have a good partner in your life, you know, you would feel like you had energy. So it's like sometimes we can get ourselves in relationships where it's really all around us all the time. And you can really feel like it's really holding you down. And I don't know about you guys, but often I feel like it's like drowning kind of feeling, like it's really holds you under, like you can't breathe and you can't be light. So it's really useful just to be aware of what some of those situations are. And that's just going to give you like the, I guess, some of the context of when you need to be aware and mindful of how to take care of yourself or to prepare. And this is what we call boundaries in terms of energy work. So you want to start thinking about, once you know the situations that tend to really trigger you or the certain people that tend to bring certain energetic reaction, what are you going to set up as boundaries? And over the years, I don't know if you guys have done much on things like people pleasing as well. Have you come across a lot of that kind of bit more psychology based work on this? No? So a little bit. Okay. So you know, there's the psychology side of this, which is they generally focus on it being people pleasing. So you're a people pleaser, right? When you're an empath. And I think that kind of sounds a bit mean to call it people pleasing myself, right? Like, but it's actually how I first came across this work, was people pleasing. And it is something that you can really learn. So it's not even necessarily, people pleasing doesn't even necessarily have to be that you're an empath and you're really sensitive. It can also be something that someone demonstrates as a desirable behavior that you then start to do. But we also will be more susceptible to behave this way when you are an empath, especially if you're an empath that wants to avoid conflict. Okay, because you'll just want to say yes. You won't want to say no to people. You tend to just agree, or you might try and do things to prevent someone from saying or asking you to do something that you wouldn't want to do. In theory, you don't want to do, but it's more that you're just trying to avoid a scenario, and so you people please, or you trying to think of a good example. So like you have your parents are deciding that, you know, they want you to come over and have a party with various different people, and you really don't want to do it, but you kind of get that sense of a bit of a guilt trip, say from your mum, is a bit like, you know, oh, you know, but if you don't do it, so and so will be really, really disappointed not to see you. And so you kind of have that grudging sense of like, okay, fine, you know, I'll go along and I'll do it and it'll make her happy, and then she'll be really grateful that I turned up. And then you turn up and you go through the whole thing and it's as painful and miserable as you thought you'd be, and you're knackered at the end of it. You feel super, super drained. You don't feel like your mum's really grateful, or the person that she gave you the guilt trip for is. And at the end of it, you just kind of feel really resentful and annoyed. And you're like, why do I always go to those things? Because, you know, she always gives me that same line and it always makes me feel the same way. And that is like, in essence, that's people pleasing, right? Because you're trying to people please and keep everyone at bay. And actually you just really resent doing it. And what we have to do in setting boundaries is work out how many of those scenarios do you just say no, and how many of those scenarios do you go, okay, but these are going to be the terms. I'm going to like go, I'm going to be there for 45 minutes and then I'm going to have an exit strategy where I leave and I've done my part and I'm okay with it. Okay, but you have to go into it with an energy of joy. If you go into it and you have that energy of resentment, then you're only going to perpetuate more people pleasing. Okay, so that's kind of the way psychologists tend to take the approach of people pleasing, and how we should, as empaths, kind of, you know, be trying to take better control over relationships where we do things that are because we feel we should do it for someone else. But you don't necessarily have to be doing things like that as an empath, right? And maybe you guys have stopped doing some of those things. I don't know. I feel like we've probably all done it at some point, especially probably when you're like a teenager, you do it a lot. But it's more about as you do it when you get a bit older. So it's understanding like those kind of scenarios. Are you going to be triggered by a situation before you even got into it? You know, as soon as you hear that the party is there, you're already going through that scenario and being like, oh God, now I'm going to do this and la 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 la, and then you're into people pleasing before you've even tried. And that's the first stage, I would say, is like those kind of conscious scenarios where you're actively aware that you really don't like those situations and that you need to find a new way to deal with them and those relationships. And those are a good place to start with setting boundaries, because if you've done that like inventory of what relationships and what situations you find really draining, those are going to be easier for you to identify that maybe you don't need to do those situations in the same way going forwards, as a good starting point. So they're a bit easier to understand and how to start setting boundaries and to practice how to say no or say yes, I'm going to do it in this way to keep everyone happy, you know, that keeps you happy and keeps them happy. Okay, so that's like a kind of more conscious awareness of simple situations. Where being an empath gets, I guess, a little trickier is either if there's something in our psyche that has a bit of a martyrdom complex. And that again also doesn't sound particularly nice, but it's where we really want to feel needed. And often we do this when we really lack self-worth and we feel like we need affirmation from other people by doing stuff. And so we over offer what we are needed for people. So I don't know, you find yourself always finding friends who seem to need something, either, I don't know, they're all single, say, so they're all single and they may be a bit lonely, and so they need you to organize lots of nice social events for them to potentially meet a partner, or you manage to constantly be creating little kind of like spontaneous blind dates as part of dinner parties to like help those single friends, like it's kind of slightly making yourself needed by somebody, so that they'll come to you for more, and they'll be like, oh yeah, you really helped me with blah, you know, with finding my partner, you know, it wasn't that great thing, which is a lovely thing. But we have to be careful when we are acting from wanting validation of ourselves and that we help people versus actually helping someone because they want us to help. And that's another one that sometimes can be quite a clear boundary issue. And if you know that you have issues with a bit of self-worth, is asking yourself, am I doing this because they want me to do it, or am I doing it because I want to feel the validation that I'm needed? And the problem with seeking that validation is it still ends up in resentment, because often we're trying to be needed in ways that we're not really being asked to be needed. And so again, we don't really get much gratitude for what we've done, and it might not really have been wanted. And it can be quite tiring because you're constantly basically trying to live someone else's life and process their stuff for them, rather than, you know, just sharing your joy. And that can be quite a hard one, I think, also to sometimes start to recognize in ourselves if we're doing a bit of wanting to be needed by other people. But it's also another situation where you might find that you're getting quite drained in those situations, because you are actually kind of taking on other people's stuff to try and solve it, and you're not seeing it get solved because it's their stuff to resolve, and that can become quite frustrating and quite exhausting. And that can also create quite tricky relationships with people that can be a little bit on and off and hot and cold. And that in itself is quite exhausting. And then you might find that you're over working into their energy and trying to guess, you know, when you go through that whole like, oh, so that friend, she said this and did this and then said this thing, and I think if I process it, that means that she really wants me to do this, and that means that I should really say this thing, you know. When you find yourself going down that really long kind of road of trying to problem solve someone else's psyche, is definitely you trying to feel needed and kind of jumping into someone else's life. And in that sense, it's a little bit avoiding dealing with your own stuff and processing your journey and your empathy that you've got to hold. And that's kind of not you being your best authentic self either. So I think that, like, from that perspective, those are like two really obvious behavioral things that you can often see in yourself if you're doing them at all, that you can start to do just to rein in where you might be losing some of that energy, and also picking up other people's feelings. And this is where one of my teachers also used to be really strict with us as energy healers, which was, just because you do a lot of energy work doesn't mean that you have the right to constantly be jumping into other people's energy fields and feeling what they feel. So you have to learn to be respectful that it's somebody else's energy field, and it's for them to invite you to feel what they feel and to engage with it and to help them should they want that energy exchange. But don't just assume that because you're sensitive, you have that right to be wanting to know and feeling what they feel. So I found that was quite useful, because what it helped me do was put myself in a bit more of a container, and to not be kind of like, oh, there's this constant flow of energy between us, but to allow myself to be like, this is my energy. And that is that person's energy. And if they want that exchange, that it will naturally happen in the right amount of flow. And if they want me to do more, then I will step in and do more. And I think that when we can start to understand that that's a part of how we can hold our authenticity and deal with processing our own stuff, that's when we start to get into how we actually manage our energy hygiene. So energy hygiene is part of that boundary setting, but it's also you doing the work to clean your own energy every day. And the most obvious things always with all of this stuff, and I feel like every week we probably are saying the same things, but it's moving the body, doing some energy work, whether that's through breathing, or if you're a visual person, you can do it quite a lot through strong visualizations, your meditation practice, and getting out into nature. And doing something joyful that you enjoy is also another really awesome way to process stuff. And those are obviously going to be the things that are going to help you with processing your body, and especially movement, because it's just going to move stuff through you. And especially if it's been a traumatic or a really stressful situation, you're going to need to allow your body to really let it out. And it's often not things like yoga if it's really traumatic. So if it's a really high stress situation, you're going to want to like do something probably a bit more cardio, or random punching or skipping or jumping, or, you know, whatever it is, you're going to really want to like move it out, as opposed to something that is not a big traumatic experience energy wise. then you may be able to be a bit more slow, allow, you know, it just to be something very gentle movement, you know, some nice simple stretches, and I'll teach you some of those in the second part. Or you could even look at just doing some really nice, good breath work to kind of help move and balance yourself back. So the other key thing in terms of setting up your energy hygiene is, again, those morning and evening routines. And Sandy, we've done workshops on those before, so you're more than welcome. The videos are in Patreon, so you can go back and have a look at what we talked about in those. As part of those, and we've been putting in energy work as well as meditation work and movement practices, is taking the time to really check in with your emotional, your physical, and your energy body at the beginning and the end of the day. Because if you can know what's yours at the beginning of the day, then when you get to the end of the day, you kind of have something to look back at and go, so what's shifted and why did it shift? But it also means that if you do the morning routine of getting yourself into your space and saying, okay, so this is how I feel. I feel a bit sleepy, or I feel quite wide awake, but I just feel a little bit sensitive today, you know, or today I'm feeling really good. I feel really clean. I feel really positive. I feel really strong. And then if something happens in the middle of the day, say you have a conversation with someone while you're making a cup of tea, and then 5 minutes later you're like, whoa, I got no energy, I've like hit a wall, you know, that moment where you just go, I'm going to eat chocolate and I'm going to devour a packet of biscuits, that often is not necessarily you. If you were in a really strong, good place and then you had that conversation and then suddenly it's like you hit a wall, that's probably that person has in some way, you've just had some massive energy drain. Okay, so it's knowing and being sensitive enough that at the start of the day, you know your space, so that you know when something happens in the day that suddenly veers you off, or like you go from being in a really positive mindset to suddenly being like, I'm really, really paranoid and I'm having loads of really paranoia, weird thoughts. It's like, what did I do? Did I, you know, talk to somebody? Did I give them a weird look? Did I have like an odd engagement? Did I not even have a conversation, but I shared a space with someone in a lift who had a really strong presence? You know, any of that kind of stuff is going to have an impact, and you're going to want to clear that. And you don't necessarily want to wait until the end of the day, but you do want to try and do an energy clearing at the end of the day, because it will help you with your sleep and having better rest. And also, again, that inventory of, is there anything else that I need to learn from today? So part of what we pick up from other people is not just an energy exchange. It could be an emotional one, and it could also be that they are actually triggering something you need to deal with. So there's a mixture. It's, did you just pick up their stuff and you don't need to know about it at all because they're just a really strong person or strong energy? Or is it that it's actually a trigger for you to stop and look at? And I would say that probably, you know, like we look at this week, I would say that probably is pretty much for everyone. It's a trigger for all of us to stop and look at, you know, where are we a racist? Where have we experienced it? Where have we got fear of being treated horrifically by somebody else? You know, where have you got a trauma that you need to deal with from your past related to that in whatever way? So allowing yourself to have that process and be okay with the fact that there are things in the world that are going to trigger us that we have to process and experience. And that is going to be different from, oh, that person just had a really strong energy and I don't need it. So one of the things that I was taught was this practice called return to sender. And it's just a really simple practice, which is that when you come across somebody who has that real like whoosh impact, and you kind of go, oh, is there anything I need from this? Is this my stuff? Am I being triggered? Is this an emotional reaction for me? Am I behaving in a certain way that this has triggered? Is to say, you know, okay, so I stop and I check, is this for me to deal with? What is there I need to learn from this? And then I would say to myself, let me keep whatever I need to learn, whatever is for me to become a better person, and then return to sender this energy with love. And it's important to try and return it with love, even if it doesn't feel very loving. In terms of the energy that you've picked up, is to, you know, obviously try and return it so that it's something that they could potentially heal from as well. So, you know, you're trying to give a quality of an energy exchange back. And energy works like that. It works in that way that you can just return, but you've got to be genuine about, I want to return this to this person. You can be quite kind of like, ugh, return, like, oh, don't want to know about that, like, ugh, like, return it, like, ugh, it's not mine, I don't want to know about it. That's okay. It doesn't need to be, you know, you don't need to be all like loving and like, oh, this is such a nice thing. You know, it's like often you don't want to know. You know, when I do a lot of massage work, I don't want to know. I'm like, you know, it's like, it's their stuff, I just feel it really strongly and I just need to be like, love it back, and that's okay. You know, like it's not that everyone processes things in their own way and it will feel in its own way in you, but the key is to return it to them with love, for them to process and to just allow yourself to learn what you need to learn from whatever it's that energy exchange has done as a trigger for you. And if it's got nothing for you, it's just to let it go, right? And if you can become aware of those situations constantly throughout the day and very quickly deal with them, so it's just, you know, it doesn't need to be a big thing. It can be a kind of like, oh, that just did that feeling. Oh, am I okay? Is there anything in there for me? I'll deal with it later, but return to sender, anything I don't need. Done. And then at the end of your day, you can kind of stop and say, okay, did I not process anything? Is there anything else I need to stop and get from today that's happened? You know, what were those moments that happened that triggered? You know, okay, do I need to do a bit more work on that? You know, or can I say I'm done with it and I'm going to let it go? And that's where then you have that morning routine, you have the evening routine to like tidy up whatever you didn't have time to address during the day, but it also means you can very quickly deal with that energetic stuff during the day. I would also say that it's a sense of your energetic boundaries. That's what you're trying to do, is be really clear, like you want to be in your cleanest vibrational state so that you can deal with your stuff and what you want in. So there may be times when you want to be really open and really aware because you're dealing with a sensitive situation, and then you can say to yourself, I'm going to allow some of those boundaries to soften. I'm going to open myself up a bit more, and then be really conscious when that conversation has ended to close it and go back to, you know, I just want to know what's my day for today. So you can shift your energy boundaries in the day if you feel strong enough. Okay, but you know, if you've woken up and you've done your morning routine and you know that you're not feeling very strong energetically and not emotionally, then it's probably not going to be a good day to have a really big emotional conversation and be like, I'm going to really open myself to feel your feelings. And obviously that's if that person wants you to as part of that conversation. The other thing that's really useful when it comes to that energetic exchange and how it makes you feel is to prioritize what's really important to you in terms of your experience and what you're trying to process in life right now. So you can kind of shelve stuff and say, I'm going to come back to that, and make a note of it in your journal. And then be really clear with yourself, but also with the people that you're interacting with, and set time limits that you try and respect so that you can process it for that amount of time, but you're not going to dwell on it or kind of let it really take grip, which sometimes we can do as empaths. We can really be like, no, I really need to process this and I really need to go through it. And sometimes it can just be like, no, you don't need to take that long. Like, you can move through it quite quickly. Or you can say, no, this is something I really want to take my time and I really want to process it. I really want to like get into the dirt of the energy that's coming through me. And then you really want to set aside a really good amount of time for your meditation practice and for your other practices that are going to support you with that process of trying to heal whatever that energy is that's going through you. You're both so quiet today.
Taking it all in.
Taking it all in. I feel like I'm saying so much to you. It's like, ah.
I'm actually liking this bit of it, so I'm just trying to sink in. What is it all about? So yeah.
So and then some other things to think about doing. So when those energy shifts happen, often we find ourselves apologizing, right? And or agreeing to something. Like, so the two most likely things that are going to happen when a really strong energy shift happens is you either apologize for kind of being in their space, or you start agreeing to do stuff because you're just kind of like, okay, because you're just like, oh, what just happened? And so really noticing if you're doing that and it really doesn't feel right for you, if you're just kind of like doing it to get out of a situation, and being kind of really on yourself. And a lot of this is about self accountability and really like holding yourself to account in a compassionate way, that you might be taking on more or giving into something because you don't want to process it, but you want to start to learn to have kind of exit cues or break strategies where when those situations happen, you can be kind of, you know, like, I'm just going to go to the bathroom, like whatever it is that you need to do that gives you that kind of moment to go, I'm not going to agree and I don't need to apologize, I just need a reset, you know. Or if you can even get to the point, and it does depend on the situation, so you know, sometimes you could have small little visualizations that, you know, when you feel that thing coming through, you're going to visualize a rose, say, and you know, you visualize the rose and then you're like, okay, cool, now I can deal with the situation. And that can be your reset if you're a really visual person, say. Or, you know, if you get to that point where a mindful breath works to help you just kind of go, don't need to agree, but to recognize that you're going to apologize or agree to something and not do that, so that you still hold your whole energy. When it comes to avoiding really difficult people and you don't have that choice, obviously, it's about preparation. So doing as many things as you can as part of that morning routine. So say if you knew you had a meeting with somebody that you found really difficult and challenging to spend time with, but you know you've got to do it, you're gonna plan your day around it. So you're going to plan enough time to digest and rest afterwards, and you're going to allow enough time to get yourself kind of like energetically pumped up before you go in to see them. Okay, and whatever that is, like I often do handstands for no apparent reason as part of my psyching myself up for really difficult people, and it's partly, you know, it's the Amy Cuddy, the psychologist, power poses are like this, they're like rah, right? So you know, if you know you're going into someone that really did, like, you love giving your power to, you know that when you go in and see them, they've got such a strong energy that you're just kind of like, you know, you want to go in as powerful as you can. So do some power poses and like really get your energy strong, like do some Kapalabhati breathing and really be like, right, I've got my fire on, my core is switched on, like I know my ego is like strong, my will is here, and you're like, I'm going to be strong and in my presence. And then you get there and you might still be like, oh, but you know, you've got more energy in you than if you didn't do that psyching up in the first place. And then you want to make sure that you've got an exit strategy. So you'll be like, this is the time, this is going to be the exit thing that I'm going to say or do that's going to get me out of here. And then I'm going to go and have half an hour of standing with my feet on some grass. Okay, whatever it is that you're going to need to go and do to like reset yourself, but you want to try and make sure that you're planning your day around that, and that you really take that time in your morning and your evening routine to ensure that you're really as clean as you can and that you're processing as much as you can. Okay, and that's kind of, I think, one of the more important things is those really challenging people, because it's really hard not to get sucked into it, and also staying super present in your body when you're with them. So feeling when you're starting to give away that power and hearing your voice. So really trying to have like a witness sitting here behind you going, oh, look at you, you're starting to like agree to something you don't agree to. Or, you know, it's kind of like that little voice that's going, and just breathe. Do you feel like the anxiety that's growing inside of you? Just breathe calmly into your belly, breathe lower and deeper. And, you know, try and have that little bit of presence of your physical body sensations as you are probably feeling some of your power kind of going towards this strong energy in front of you. The other thing is not needing to explain yourself. So if you find that you're starting to try and justify or explain, or you're not speaking up when you should and you normally would do, all those kind of signs when you're in that situation of stopping and being like, why am I not saying that thing? Like, can I try and find something to say? how can I say it? How can I follow up afterwards? So even if you don't find yourself in that challenging situation saying it at the time, making sure that you follow up afterwards so that you're not completely giving away your power to that strong energy that can be really impacting you. And also, you know, ask for help. So if you find someone really challenging, ask other people for help as well, because other people sometimes can develop really good strategies that suddenly you're like, oh, that's so simple and it works really well with that person, right? And other people sometimes can just see a strategy that works for a certain person that is a really, really challenging one for you. So not being afraid to ask people for help and for saying like, I'm finding this really hard. Do you have a way of dealing with that person or that situation? Or, you know, I was thinking of saying this, do you think they'd react well to that? And they might say, no, you know, you better say it like this, and they'll respond better. But also going into it with the mindset that you can change it. So when you stay in that authentic self and you stay present to your feelings and you stand in not apologizing and asserting yourself, you will hold your own energy, and then people will react to that, right? And you may preconceive a scenario that with that strong energy, when you're going into that situation, the person is going to have a certain reaction. And so you kind of anticipate, you make up a story in your head of how this whole thing's going to play out. And so you already are draining your energy and letting your power go to that situation. And what you really want to be doing is going in there, power pose, holding presence to yourself, and being ready to kind of, my brain just went blank, being ready to go through with that situation of holding centered, because you'll probably find that when you hold that center, that person doesn't have the reaction you may have had in the past. Okay, and so they won't start taking that same amount of energy from you. So the more you learn to hold that center and that power of your own, the less you're going to start to let other people's energy either drain yours or dump on you. Because that's the other one, right? Because I'm saying, like, you can have power people that seep your energy, but you can also have people who dump all their stuff on you. And if you can hold strong in yourself and be like, this is me, I am, you know, like, this is what I want to hold, this is what I'm willing to hold. When people will stop dumping things on you as much if you start holding your own space. And then you don't feel like you're carrying so much stuff either. So it's really important to be holding that space for yourself, and you're going to be doing that through knowing what's yours and sending it away. And you can do that by staying present in those conversations and knowing when you're starting to either let something be dumped on you or you're letting your power seep. Yeah, it's like they're not, in some ways they're not miraculous things, but it's being really conscious of your energy, because you control your energy with your mind and with how you think, and what your thoughts are doing are changing your emotional state. And so you can change the energy into interaction by deciding to change it and deciding to hold center. And that is what is going to very, you know, with that over 90%, I would say, non-verbal communication will shift by you just deciding to consciously stay centered and hold that center. And you can have that power often without really needing to say, unless you've got someone who is so caught up in themselves that they have no observation skills at all about anything other than their own little whirlwind that's going on. Those people, they're probably going to find it hard to notice that you're staying still, but if you stay still long enough, they will react. Okay, and they will see it, because then they'll be like, oh, you're not caught up in my whirlwind. How are you not caught up in my whirlwind? Right? And then you're just kind of like, I'm good. You're good, that's nice. And it makes it a more pleasurable exchange, and then you won't find you get some of those reactions you might get in some of those situations. And then the last thing that I was going to add in is it's always about what brings you joy. Okay, so as an empath, it's very easy to let our energy, our emotions get caught up in other people's, and you're going to know if what you're deciding to do in those interactions is going to bring you joy or not. So if in that interaction it's going to make you feel anxious, or it's going to make you feel low or sad, or it makes you feel agitated and frustrated, it's probably not the choice, and it's probably not the way you should be holding your energy and thinking about the situation. And the more present you can become obviously helps open up joy. And if you stay present, you can get that sense of where's the joyous reaction, right? And it might not be that it's like, yay, joy, right? It's just joy as in like contentment or a sense of peace. But it's going to be allowing yourself to sense into that. And initially, if you've been giving away a certain amount of power in interactions and allowing people to dump lots on you, that can be quite scary because your fear level is still quite high and that's still running the show quite a lot. And so it's going to be quite hard at the beginning to sense into the joy, but it does get easier in those interactions. But I think if you do enough meditation work, you probably know how to sense into your joy, even in those challenging situations, and will be able to differentiate between when it's your fear that's making you not want to talk to somebody or not wanting to hold your center, and when it's actually, you know, that you're clear that, you know, yeah, that's the joyful thing to do, and I'm going to make that decision. Okay, because sometimes there's the fear of change, and you've just got to be aware of when it's the fear of change that is what you need to step through in those situations, as opposed to the fear of the reaction that you perceive always happens. Does that make sense? Yeah. So it's understanding those two types of fear, and if your joy is to step through that fear of the change that you're about to make, then going for it and being like, it's okay to have that bit of fear. I'm going to step up and I'm going to, like, you know, I'm going to say this thing to this person and I'm going to smile while I do it and be okay with that. And allow yourself to step into that, but also be compassionate if you don't feel like you have the energy to do that, you know, and say, I'll try it next time. Okay. And it's amazing how positive the reactions are when you do this, and how much more worthy you feel and how much more respect you get when you start holding your own space, and stop taking on too much of other people's stuff. And I think it's one of those things. It was definitely a generational thing. I've noticed there's a lot of people of a certain generation who really struggle with this. I feel like our generations are probably a bit more aware of some of these shifts, but there's definitely been that generational change. So just being really mindful of how much we've also learnt about some of those passive behaviours as an empath that can make it harder for you to process stuff. So I was going to do the movements for what we're going to do. Are you both got space to move? It's not like, there's a few like big moves and then the rest is all quite small.
Yeah, I'm gonna get that set up now.
Cool. I'll give you a sec. I'm just going to stop it and then I'll start the recording again.